Thank you for joining me in today's video. We are going to look at the n8n.io platform for building AI agents. Other than AI agents, you can also automate workflows. The purpose of today's video is to create a data processing workflow that will not include an AI agent, simply to be a soft or a gentle introduction to the platform and to the dashboard. In this video, we are going to create a task management workflow. Again, this will not have an AI agent in it, and we are going to work with the nodes and connecting the nodes and connecting to an API. Before we connect to the API, though, what we will do is connect to a JSON placeholder. Now, if you know nothing about this, let's start from the beginning. An API is simply an application programming interface. All it is a way for multiple software to communicate to one another. So it's like a virtual handshake. A request is made from one software sent to a different software, which would then send data back, and vice versa. So when we start by using the JSON placeholder, the reason that I'm using this is so that we don't get stuck on authentication. API authentication can sometimes be complex and have numerous challenges when trying to connect. So to skip that and just to show you the functionality between requests being sent between software and then data being transferred, we are going to use the JSON placeholder. After that, I will show you how to connect to a simple API that I have created that will not require authentication, so it also allows you to go in and reconfigure to connect to an actual API. As far as the JSON placeholder, it is very realistic in the sense that it has many sample tasks or data that has realistic structure, just like you would have in an actual API. It has related endpoints like users and comments. It also won't go down, it won't change, so you can always use it to test. And these are perfect to test different features within n8n. Let's get started. If you are new to the n8n platform, create a free account and you will be able to follow along. I highly suggest going ahead and purchasing a plan. There are some plans for about 20 bucks a month. It's totally worth it if you want to gain the experience to work with the platform. The platform is pretty seamless in its use. So here we have the current workflow that I already had built, but we're going to start from scratch. In the dashboard off to the left, you will see an overview, personal, and then my projects. Let's go ahead and select this plus button up here for workflow. And you can create a new personal project if you want. You will see the blank dashboard here. And at the center, add first step. A couple tools that you can use to help navigate the dashboard are these zoom and zoom out buttons, and then also the zoom to fit. So once you have a workflow with quite a few nodes stretched out and moved around, you can come here and select this, and it will keep everything within the frame of the dashboard. To get started, let's go ahead and add our first step. So every workflow should start with some kind of what they call a trigger. So when you select the add first step, you will see from the right that the node library pops up, and then there's actually a longer list down here below that you can scroll down through. But every workflow should start with a trigger. You can trigger them manually. You can schedule a trigger. You can have some sort of activity or behavior that triggers, like a phone call. But for this workflow, let's start with a schedule trigger here. So just type schedule. You will see the schedule trigger come up in the results set. Go ahead and select that. Now, all of a sudden, you will see the screen change. We are actually in the parameters and settings menu for this particular node. You can see that there are trigger rules like interval, days, trigger hour, or by the minute. We can also add rules down here at the bottom. You will also see the output over here. On some nodes, you'll also see an input on the left side of this menu. I'm going to click out of this real quick just to show you how to click out and click back in. But if you select out here outside of this menu, you will see it takes us back to the dashboard. As usual, you want to save early and often. So let's select save. And then off to the right here, you will see that save success message. So now we see our schedule trigger in the middle of our dashboard. If you want to add other nodes, functionality, or connections, you're going to select this plus sign over here. Notice when I hover over the node that all of a sudden I get a little menu. You can trigger, you can turn it on and off, you can delete it, and then you've got some other options here. You can also execute from here or from here. We want to configure this schedule trigger. Let's go ahead and double click this. This gets us back into the menu. So let's select a trigger interval. So instead of days, let's go ahead and say hours. The hours between our triggers, let's change this to 6, so every 6 hours. And then we can execute the step just to see if it's working or functioning properly. Over here, you see an output. That's a good sign. We see a green check mark. And then usually at the bottom right of the screen, you will see a notification that looks green. Here we have a few settings like schema related to a database. We have a table set up here, and then we have a JSON format. So it's very flexible in the formatting of the data. And ultimately, we wanted to see that green check mark. And now we can see what kind of data that we're also using in the JSON as well. This is going to come into play later when we start connecting to an API, or in this case, first we're going to connect to the JSON placeholder data. Let's select out of here, select save. So now we know that our schedule trigger is working. Also down below, you can see that we have output information down below. We'll have log information down to the left here. Over to the right, we have another menu here, or menu items. And if we want to create more nodes, this is the node library that we saw earlier when I brought up the trigger. Initially, we pulled this up from selecting the node plus sign here. That also pulls it up. I'm going to just select this. Since we are connecting to a JSON placeholder, which is a substitute for an API, we can type an HTTP request right here. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to connect it from this node. We will add it from here and then type the same thing. Select HTTP request. Now you should see the configuration menu for the HTTP request node. You can also come up here and change the name if you want. The method we are going to use is going to be get, because we want to get information. Now we will copy and paste the URL for that JSON placeholder. I will include this in the description below. We're not going to use authentication, which again is why we are using this JSON placeholder. Let's go ahead and select outside of this configuration to the dashboard. Go ahead and select save. Now you can see on our dashboard, we have the HTTP request here. You can double click this to go back into the menu and see that everything was saved properly the way you wanted it to be. Let's select back out. I'm going to show you what the JSON placeholder. Here is the JSON placeholder. This is all the data in a JSON format, which is typically you have the array brackets here, and then, or the square brackets for the entire array. And then you've got these curly brackets. And within each curly bracket, you could consider this sort of like a record. And within this record, you can see that we have these various properties or property names and then a value. Property name and then a value. In data, an ID is pretty standard to go with a piece of data. It gives the entire piece of data identification. And we will take a look at that later as well. So you can see we have this little chunk of data is number 1 ID. This little chunk of data has an ID of number 2. This bit of data has an ID of 3. If you have other add-ons in your browser that you can extend the browser functionality with, this actually helps to see the data in a format that is easier on the eyes. So I like to use this pretty print. If you turn it off, this is what JSON looks like. And it's really hard on the eyes. So I recommend getting something that will format the JSON, an extension for your browser. I'm using the Chrome browser. Let's go back to n8n dashboard. So the last we did, we saved our updates here for both of our nodes. We have our schedule trigger node and our HTTP request node. I'm going to go ahead and fit this to screen. You can see that it moves our items on the dashboard to where we can clearly see everything. Let's go ahead and check to make sure that our HTTP request is working. We will select inside of the HTTP request node, select execute step. And as expected, we see that the node executed successfully. We know that because there's a proper output. And you would have also seen the green notification message at the bottom of the right screen. And then up here, we have the green check mark. So that's all good information right there. And then we can see that we actually have 200 items from the JSON placeholder. And here's all of our record information. All right, so you're doing great. Let's move on to the next step here. The next step here is to add an if condition. And this is directly based off of our data from our HTTP request. Let me show you what I mean. Let's add an if node by selecting the plus icon here on the output of the HTTP request. Type if in there. Oh, and you can see I accidentally selected a switch node. So I'm going to select out here outside of the node. Let's go ahead and delete this. Let me select that again. Type in if. I was a little too quick on that. Select if. This is going to route our options based off of the data that we receive from the HTTP request. Here inside of the parameters of the if node, you can see we have an initial value, a comparison operator, and then an output value. In our initial value, we want to tell it what to read. What piece of data do we want to read? Now, there is a way to universally or generally choose the data type. So we can do this by typing an expression in here, and it's going to be open and closed, two sets of open and closed curly braces. For JSON, you always start with that money sign there, $sign, JSON.completed. The sort of keywords that are already used in JSON or key punctuation here is going to be the brackets, and then also the $sign with the JSON dot. The dot just says, hey, we're drilling down into something specific. This completed word here is where you will actually find the name of a property within the JSON. Let me show you what I mean here. Off to the left, our data coming in, we have the completed property here, and it's either true or false. And you can tell that intuitively by the fact that there's the false value. And because there's no string double quotes or single quotes around this, we know that it's a certain type of value, and that certain type of value is called a Boolean. Let me show you where this comes into play. Let me show you first off by executing this step, and we should receive an error because it will be the wrong type of operator based on the type of data. And I'll explain that in a second. But the value we are looking for here is going to be true. And let's execute. And you can see we got a green check mark for the output, and then you would have received the green check mark and that the node was run successfully at the bottom right of your screen, but you will see that we have no output data in the branch. So that's a problem. So this can be a little misleading, but if you go back in here, there's a little sign on the operator, AB, and that distinguishes a string type of data, which is right here. And you'll notice in string type of data, it has a comparison is equal to. However, this value is not a string, it is a Boolean. Boolean also has is not empty, is empty, is equal to. So let's select is equal to true. And then in the original expression here, let's go ahead and put our JSON in again. JSON.completed. Okay, so that doesn't look like it wants to stick. So here's the other option. You can take and drag the property from the input over here, and you can see that it's sticking because expression is now selected. And that would probably stick by typing that in if I had selected expression here. So let's go ahead and try that. It's set to expression. Let's try typing that just to test. Yeah, so that's what it needs right there. Okay, so now let's go ahead and execute this step. Take a look at our data here, and we can see that now data is filtered through and it only pulls out these true values. This is the if node or the condition node, which branches the data based off of data coming in and whatever we select. We just configured the if node with the true value. We won't need to configure the false value because now that the node has the parameters or the information for the condition on true, it will automatically handle the false. And before we double check that, just to verify, go ahead and select save. You want to select save early and often on this platform. We can also fit to zoom here so that we straighten everything up in our dashboard. Let's go ahead and select, double click the if node here. Off to the right on the output, you can see we have the true branch and there's 90 items. And if I scroll over here, you can see the false branch automatically has 110 items. And the output values are as we expect with false. Let's select the dashboard. At this point, we now have raw JSON data coming in from the HTTP request. We have the if node or the condition node that separates our data in a way that we have configured, which is completed yes or true versus completed false. Now we want to do something with that information. We want to prepare it, so to speak. This is sort of considered like a middle layer in the data workflow. We would prepare this data, and then after that, the data would go somewhere as an end result, like a Gmail email, or maybe a Google Sheet, maybe some kind of document like a PDF. And there are nodes in the node library just for that exact output. What we will use on this data workflow is a edit field, or it's called an edit field set. I'm gonna select this, type in edit, and we want to use edit fields set in parentheses. This is to modify, add, or remove item fields. So this is how we're going to prepare the data, the raw JSON data coming in. We can see over here coming out of the condition node or the if node, and you can see it's an input to the edit fields node. We want to do manual mapping, and we're going to start adding fields for mapping these values to, so that this mapped value can then be output into a certain format. Go ahead and select the add field here. I want to add this final value or expression here. We can see that the task with the JSON to call the title is completed by the user. And then to fill in that value, we are using the JSON.userID. Let's just call this summary. We can execute this step just to make sure that the summary will indeed show the title, which is right here. Up here at the top is the user ID, and then this is the record ID on the second row. Execute step. You can see in the output, we have our green check mark that the node fired correctly. And then let's see our output or prepared data. So we have task, and then we have completed by user 1. Okay, and this all appears to match appropriately with the input data. Let's take a look over here. User ID 1. Yep. And then you can see the titles align with the output. And you can scroll through the pages, and if you want to do a deeper dive into verifying the data, you could do that. Let's go ahead and add another field in our output data preparation. Call this status. We'll just say done. Execute the step here. we can see over here to the right that it's created our status field with the value done. Now let's say we wanted a timestamp on this. We can add a field. We will put timestamp, or you could just say time if you want. And then down here for the value, let's use JSON now. Select expression. It should recognize this as an expression. And then down at the bottom, you will be able to see that there is in fact a green date time. And so go ahead and execute the step. You should see green output check mark up at the top and a green success message that the node fired at the bottom. And then for the time value, we can see that we have the date time for right now. All right, so let's go ahead and select out of this. Now on the dashboard, you can also see that it's added our edit field for completed. Go ahead and select save. You can also rename these. We could call this completed. Select out and save. So this is the middle layer to the preparation of your output data. We've just now formatted that output data, and then at the end of this output completed node, which is right here, we would then select, and you could create a Gmail, a PDF document, a Google Sheet off of this so that a report would be generated automatically. Next, let's go ahead and do the same thing for the incomplete field here. So false was the data that came in. So for any data that comes in that was incomplete, it will be marked as false. And then out here in the edit field, let's go ahead and add this. So we select that plus sign, search for edit field set. There we go, manual mapping. And then in here, you can see that the data coming in is all false for completed. So now we would run a similar report for this. So we might want to do roughly the same field names, summary, JSON title, user ID, task, incomplete. We can execute this step, and we can see the node executed properly, and we see our formatted data in the output. Let's go ahead and do the same by adding another field here. And this was, I believe, user ID. Let's go back and check. Close out of here, save this, go into our completed node. We had status done and then time. So we want to do status incomplete. Then here we want to do time, and we can add the JSON for now. And then select expression, and then it should be able to detect the JSON. Now we can execute this step. We got green. This all checks out. Okay, perfect. And then here we can type incomplete, or name these whatever you want. What makes sense for what you're doing in your workflow. Execute. Everything looks good. Select outside of the node configuration menu. Now select save on the dashboard. And there you go. This is your completed data workflow. We have a scheduled trigger. We have the HTTP request, which pulls the data in, or the JSON in this case. Then we have a condition that separates that data based on the values within the data. So completed or incomplete is how we chose to separate the data, which you can separate data in all sorts of ways. You could even add more node conditions after this. And then we have these edit set fields here, where we are preparing the data that comes out of the if condition, and we are formatting it because the next thing that would get connected to this is some output like a form for reporting. So great job. Thanks for sticking with me on the video. The second half of this video, we are going to actually update this data workflow and connect to a real live API that I have built specifically for this tutorial.